Explaining. All right, so it is now going. So if I went to my Facebook, it should be there.
And then shoot me the link. I'll pop it on my
I'll
page too.
I will share with you.
Oh yeah, you can just pop on my page directly.
Yes. Share to.
No, just give it, like, send it as a link. I'll pop it live.
Okay. Well, this will both. It'll be there on your page, and you can share it as well. I don't know if that makes a difference. Oh, my friend Vicky is apparently, or perhaps she's just scrolling. We will be beginning in a moment. Just sharing this here link around. If anybody would like to help out with that, that'd be appreciated. Paradialectic. Number 2. Proverbs and memes. On the way over here, I just wanted to be thinking about this, and I put on. I did a YouTube search for paradox in Proverbs, and everything that came up was Bible stuff. I forgot that there is a book of the Bible that is
Proverbs.
Proverbs.
Because the other thing that we said, there was Proverbs, and then there's parables.
Yes. Yeah. And a parable is like a story that is the substrate of proverb or meme.
Right. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. And then there's things like Brene Brown's thing, which isn't quite either, but there's this, she encapsulates an idea that represents one half of a broader view. Right. I don't know the term for that. Like, what would I was trying to find to see if there was like a succinct term that we could use to describe that.
Like how Brene Brown, as in like the meme
of premise that vulnerability is strength.
Yeah. As in like, if a meme is like a rectangular image or just an idea that catches fire, and hers, because it's encased in a sort of
it's like a self-help. It's like a meme in the 90s sense, hers, right? Because that's how they used to describe a meme. It was more of this kind of like virus of the mind that takes hold rather than this kind of like, infographic picture that you pass around on social media.
Well, and in the Brene Brown case, it's like, that is really interesting and unique. And I think that that's what, when someone is left brain, scientific, objectivity, no nonsense for a period of their life, and then they find either sort of esoteric, magical ideas about reality, or they become religious from an atheistic, objectivity, materialist beginning, or in the case with her, like, she talks about how she was so not vulnerable and not okay in swimming in emotional waters, territory, and then through research realized that I think that helps a lot of people who have a big intellectual self-defense to what they see as wooey nonsense.
Right.
That it really helps when it's delivered by somebody who is
been through, they live the same life that they've lived, that skepticism.
Yeah. And has chops as a skeptic. And that's so it's really interesting to watch the world of neuroscience publishing things that are, they seem almost like hippy dippy memes.
Oh yeah, that happened. I mean, this happened with my field as well, where you had like the humanistic psychologists embracing meditation and like compassion and the relationship and therapy back in the 70s. And then you had the radical behaviorists going, no, we're going to stick to observable behavior and behavior change. If you talk about emotions or the mind, not my class, I'll kick you out, because we're going to only look at the environment and how that interacts with behavior. And then it was the radical behaviorists that embraced mindfulness. Why? Because the reason why behaviorism doesn't work with complex thinking adults, especially those with complex emotional problems, is they don't respond to their environment directly the way that kids and animals do. That mindfulness makes behaviorism work again, which is really ironic that you find this thing that's Buddhist, that is that the hippies embraced back in the 60s and 70s. And now the most rigorous and scientific of all of the approaches to psychology have embraced it. And now they're publishing all of this research on compassion and loving kindness from folks who never would have touched it 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Wonderful to see. And I think that will happen on the opposite end of, like, I think that I just overall observe that people who identified so much with words like compassion and peace and unity and ideas of kindness, and that camp, if it is a camp, could really use some chess tactics in the way they approach life, and then the rigid data driven, like left brained, as we say, chess minded folks could get some more sentimentality and vulnerability going on in their existence.
Right, a little bit of warmth there. Yeah.
So ready to begin?
Let's do it.
I suppose we did, but welcome to the second episode of the Paradialectic podcast with your hosts, Zachary Winchester and Eric Miller, PhD. Each episode, we will explore ways in which the world, our minds, and our hearts are often filled with contradictory truths from paradoxes and dialectics, and finding creative ways to resolve these perplexing conundrums. Zachary is a professional nonsense man. Hello. And Eric is a clinical psychologist with a passion for creative expressions. Today's topic, we will be exploring why memes and proverbs naturally create paradoxes and dialectics, and how to step back to see the big picture hidden by advice and clever phrases that oversimplify the world. So I believe the first one we would like to get into is the I guess we could say the meme, the
meme in the old sense, in the 90s sense, which is a virus of the mind, right? That this idea that takes hold and kind of revolutionizes the way that people think. It takes over the way their brain works.
Yes, which sometimes can be gotten across in a proverb, in a turn of phrase. Like greed is good is an example of something that was a meme at a certain time. There's some pushback against that now, or there always was. But
I think I think that's kind of what we're going to get at, is that the reason why I think these extreme ideas really take hold is because they at some point break with the mainstream view of things, which was greed was bad, right? And we're going to talk about Brene Brown and how she revealed to that scientifically minded, fact-oriented person that vulnerability is strength, right? Which was breaking that mold. This showed the other half of that person's world. And then we also have this kind of trend that kind of ebbs and flows of people who are attached to non-attachment, right? So, but we were talking about Brene Brown a while back, and you mentioned how vulnerability is strength.
And sure can be in many scenarios. And then
so how have you found that? Like, because that struck me as something that you found to be important to you, right? And when we're talking about it, it sounds like you heard her and that was like something that really struck you. Because when I heard her, it struck me as well, because I grew up really scientifically minded, and I grew up teaching martial arts, and I was libertarian for a long time. And I actually read the book Greed is Good. And I was like, at the time, I was like, yeah, there are elements of this. And it's really interesting because I can kind of see the point of view of a lot of people on the right now, because I used to think that way. But in my early 30s, I really started to have a lot of experiences that, and we can talk about these later, really opened me up to realizing that vulnerability was strength. So I'm kind of curious how that struck you when you came across her.
Well, I liked her presentation in that she arrived at something that we would see as very sentimental through research and approaching it objectively. And I suppose I could really, it was like something that, it was one of those things that I had noticed over the years of like the value in being vulnerable. Things like, how do you know you can trust someone? By trusting them. Um, certain, just seeing that there's a very low reward in low risk relationships.
Mm.
And a high emotional and just all around, like all the different metrics of value in life that you get when you're putting something on the line.
Mm.
And that with other humans and relationships, but also just pursuits that have been important to me have also brought me the most pain when failure happens. And failure happens.
All the
And
time, right? I mean, if you're doing anything new, you're doing anything interesting, you're gonna mess up at it. You're gonna fail.
absolutely.
That's how you learn
Yes.
about how to do the new thing.
Stand-up comedy, I think, is the most stark example that I've experienced of that. There is no experiencing that or getting good at it without having those times when you bomb. And bombing in stand-up comedy is one of the most it is an involuntary ego death of the highest caliber of ouch. But the reward is so high, and you're judged every moment. And so that's an example of something that comes with such a high reward, and you grow the strength, the good kind of callous from experiencing high levels of embarrassment. And that's something that I'd say that I have had a ton of in my life. And it's a subjective, emotionally experienced thing of like I could say I've done a lot of embarrassing stuff. But that's subjective. I have felt embarrassed a lot by being public and just saying a lot, experiencing being wrong, failing at funny on stage is that certainly is that. So I started changing my. You begin to like lower your defenses a little bit if you really take to heart that vulnerability is strength, or take to mind. And that's really interesting too, is that I see people like, oh well, the data shows that if I am emotionally vulnerable, then I will benefit from that in some quantifiable way. All right, I will proceed with being less emotionally guarded.
And I think this is kind of where we get at that, where these clever truths stated simply create paradoxes in dialectic. So do we want to, for the audience, maybe some people who haven't tuned in before, quickly define paradoxes and dialectics?
Yes. My definition of paradox today would be when there are two opposing truths that are either true in different situations, or just, well, I mean, I'd like to say that everything important is sort of a paradox.
Right.
And a dialectic is well, I see it as the conversation, the effort through communication to make each other smarter, as opposed to be right about something that is complex, paradoxical, that is not a winning and losing side, that is about we're exploring nuance through conversation.
Right. So I think you can look at it as a conversation, because you have dialectic as a form of discourse and a way of finding the truth. So this is kind of that philosophical approach. And then there's also this concept of a dialectical dilemma. And for me, this arises from how we understand the world. Our mind, in the way that we use language, the easiest way to understand the world is to split it into opposites: good, bad, right, wrong, dark, light. And then we often will make judgments about one half of those things, that will say, well, light is good and dark is bad. Or if you're a goth, dark is good and light is bad, right? But you basically get to pick a team at that point. And this is, I think, why it's so easy in our country, though other countries don't always fall into this in the same way, to fall on this dichotomous political spectrum. Okay. So dialectics are this idea that we have these paradoxes, but here's the thing: both things are usually good and both things are usually bad in different ways, and they're both usually interconnected. So in order to resolve this dialectical dilemma that seems like these truths oppose each other, that we need to level up and come at it from a perspective where we understand the pros and cons of both sides, and both sides. And then we need to know how to navigate those depending on our situation. So to say that dark is good, if you are trying to thread a needle, maybe not so much. If you're having a romantic evening, maybe that's a little better, right? That if you're letting off fireworks, daytime's not so good. But I think you get the idea that when we perceive the qualities on both sides and we're able to be flexible within them, I think we've got that dialectical resolution there. Yeah.
Well, positive negative is a oversimplified turn of speech that I hear a lot. I mean, the idea of no only positive vibes, that in itself is the negation of the obviously existing shadow of things and becomes negative quickly. And it's to categorize things in that way is one of the more intensely that I observe that as being oversimplifying the world to the point of stupidity and sometimes danger.
Right. But I think we do that all of the time. Most of us do. And I guess this is why we're doing this podcast, is because it's so easy to fall into. And you kind of talked about how you were embracing this view. And I've done the same thing at different times in my life, that vulnerability is strength. And because I'm able to be vulnerable and I'm able to withstand all of this emotional weight and pain and this openness, that I should do it and that I'm going to keep doing it all the time. Because I don't know if that was you, if I remember right, that was kind of your experience. And that was my experience too. And then I came back and then go, well, sometimes strength is strength, which also sounds obvious. But when you're caught up in one half of a dialectic or a meme, we often forget that. Just like about a few months ago, before COVID, I saw a tremendous number of memes among my friends about non-attachment and being able to let go of people. And I haven't seen many of those memes recently, now that COVID's hit, that all the memes are, I miss people. And if all of these people were so successful at non-attachment, then they would just be kind of floating in bliss in this sense of social isolation. And I think that the idea here is it's definitely important to be able to detach and to be fluid. But the flip side, as human beings, there is attachment. We need to have attachment. We need to have commitment. We need to reach out to people, that this is part of what makes us who we are. Right. So what was it like when we started talking about that idea of, back to the original idea from the flip side, that strength is strength too?
Yeah, well, there's definitely situations where someone being strong allows for others to be vulnerable. I find that in like a hosting capacity, when I'm facilitating group discussion moments, or when I'm observing somebody else facilitating a group discussion. Sometimes it seems to me like, in order to help those who have more of a propensity to being shy, introverted, in order to get them talking and get them comfortable, it can be very helpful for there to be a strong facilitator who is creating the space for them to be able to be that way. And there's a structure there. And also there's always somebody who will hog all the airtime if they're allowed to. And so sometimes having that gatekeeper, facilitator, host role to be like, all right, this person, it's this person's time, trying to give everybody equal time, like that strength will allow for someone else to be vulnerable, as where if it's just a complete dog eat dog atmosphere, then somebody may be silent the entire time. And also, like as a therapist, I would say that's a great example of that is a moment in which it's kind of both, as with that vulnerability is strength at moments, because it's not like you're doing guarded listening, when doing
Well, it's actually really interesting because the form of therapy that I do really tries to balance these ideas and how we approach things, which is old school psychodynamic psychotherapy really kind of took the view that the therapist should be stoic, that we should be a blank slate. We don't share any of our personality. We don't share our emotions with the client. We ask occasional questions and let them talk the entire time. And that is so much not how I do therapy. That acceptance commitment therapy and then dialectical behavior therapy, which is part of why we're talking about this, is that these approaches say that all human beings get caught up in the same traps. And that includes me and all of my clients and my friends and the people I look up to, that language and memory and this natural tendency to get lost in dialectics causes us to get lost. And so what I'll do a lot of times is I will share how I have been vulnerable, or how I have made mistakes, or how I've gotten caught up in my emotions, and then how I found my way out. So if I was to share in a way that would burden my clients and they would feel like they had to take care of me, or it was about my ego, then that's not helpful for therapy. But if I can go, hey, I was hurting in this way and I was stuck for 5 months because of it, and here's how I got out, and I was using these principles I'm showing you, then it kind of goes, well, one, okay, I'm not the only one in the room who's felt these things or thought these things. And number two, well, if you can get out of it, maybe I can get out of it too. And so there's strength there because I'm showing that I can do the thing that they're wanting to do, but there's also vulnerability because I'm revealing that I'm not perfect, which nobody is, but a lot of professionals tend to pretend that they are in whatever profession they tend to be in.
Which makes you an understanding recipient in that moment. And there's something that I don't have sciencey jargon words for about that, you know, just speaking your it's like what you would want, the stuff that you would want to get to in psychotherapy for someone to be able to feel the warranted feelings or explore a traumatic event, like just making mouth sounds into the void about it doesn't seem to be what you're trying to have happen, which is to speak and be understood.
Right.
Which is and then there's this power of being seen that I'm only like really that's becoming a theme of my life lately, is that there's an added potency to exposing things about yourself that are not ready. And that's what I like to have out of dialectical conversations with my friends, that I need to have somewhere where I can go, where I can do computing by communicating. And I don't have a conclusion yet. In fact, I'm starting to see more and more that conclusions are kind of are dumb. That's like that we're not trying to arrive at a parochial understanding that we then lock in forever. 'Cause that's what it is to have one side of a paradoxical proverb.
Exactly, to kind of crystallize that one thought. But I also think that that's necessary, as long as we recognize that there's a rhythm involved. And I think this is another way to resolve dialectics, is not just to level up to understand both sides of a point, but also realize there needs to be a rhythm to these things. There's a time and place for being stoic and like objectively strong, and there's a time and place for being open and vulnerable. And you've got to figure out when those both work.
Yeah, there's different games that we get into for sure. Like I think of somebody who is what we would say like bleeding hearted, compassionate for the poor, and say they get into the realm of politics. They got to be bloody strong and assertive when they're in the arena trying to fight for the benefits of the poor. When that, like, now, so it was emotional vulnerability about something that it's really hard to bear about society, like who's getting the short end of the stick. But so through they with emotional vulnerability, they found their their goal, the hill they want to die on, but to go and actually fight for that will require strength.
Yes.
Because if you lose to the more assertive alpha, then you have failed to win.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think, the idea here now, so we're talking about, so how do we resolve these dialectics? So vulnerability is strength. So what did you find to be most powerful in that for you? When you first heard Brene Brown, like how did that strike?
I think of how much my initial understanding of bravery was actually kind of what I would call now kind of being or acting like a sociopath. Like just that being tough and being brave and being masculine was being unaffected by stuff. And I've noticed that there are those who are much less fearful of physical pain than myself. Like I was never a daredevil. I never got into fights. But I've always, or for a very long time, or at times where I'm feeling very extroverted, will do things that others are really terrified about in the emotional vulnerability department of expressing things that I could totally keep secret and that are a bit that I'm insecure about, and doing the public performance thing, like there's so many very, very difficult to bear moments of public failure that happens when you do that a lot. And yeah, and having the artist goal of like just wanting to express sincerely or beautifully or whatever, sometimes comically, that is a situation that has always been a situation where vulnerability has been strength, and actually attempting to be invulnerable has rendered me kind of worthless in the department that I value most. Like trying to be invulnerable and also be sincerely expressive. Those
mix.
Yeah.
Not in that way. Not in the format that you've chosen.
Yeah. But then I'm a big proponent of precaution and being careful. Which is being invulnerable in a different way, but yeah, I have been thinking a lot about that since, because that conversation that we had about vulnerability is strength, and well, sometimes strength is strength. That was actually the first time that I'd received any pushback about this idea, and I noticed that we do that a lot. We get, especially when there's something that is held as an idea that is so one-sided for so long. You know, the people used to. I mean, we were talking the other day about World War II vets. There was societal stigma around seeking therapy, and you just had the most traumatic thing happen, and there's all these folks that and the euphemistic language that we use about PTSD, that it was once shell shock. Carlin has that rant about that. It was shell shock, and then it was battle fatigue, and now it's post-traumatic stress disorder, and that creates an environment more where you can seek help, and that's a great example of vulnerability as strength. I mean, it is a vulnerable choice to declare to the world, or even to one professional, that I am here now in the role of someone seeking help, and you are to help me.
Yeah. So for me, it was always really a shift back and forth for me, because I kind of grew up with a very scientific mindset. I grew up raised on Cosmos and Natural Kingdom and all of these scientific based shows, as much as I was like the kids shows, Sesame Street, Polka Dot Door, all those things of my era. And so I got kicked out of Sunday school when I was 6 years old, because I was asking like the 12-year-old questions to the woman that always worked with the little kids. Mm-hmm. And so that all the other kids started to rebel, and they threw me into the sermon where I couldn't raise my hand. And I dug it because it was philosophical, and I was at home. So here I was, really confident in my head, on my own, thinking logically, scientifically. And then I hit puberty, and all of a sudden, other people mattered to me in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
But then that was overwhelming for this really scientifically oriented, nerdy kid who didn't know how to then like connect to other people. I was lost in my imagination. I drew a lot. And so I ended up becoming a romantic, and that was super vulnerable, being romantic as a teenager. And then I got really hurt. And so then I became stoic. I found this way to become stoic. Industrial music, libertarianism. I became a martial arts instructor. And then I found this outlet through running a martial arts studio and being a leader. And this was wonderful. And I was originally to be a psychologist, and I ended up going to law school. This is during that whole greed is good phase.
Mm-hmm.
And then I, for the first time in my life, felt like a rock star. I had this relationship where it was the center of my social circle in both this area in Ipsy I was a part of, the scene there, and then this martial arts scene. And it felt great. I felt like I was, as Trump would say, I was winning, Charlie Sheen, right? And then it all collapsed. It was all ego because it wasn't vulnerable. It wasn't real in that way that you talked about. And then I kind of flipped that circuit again. And this is before Brené Brown, but I discovered Burning Man. And I, for the first time in my life, realized that community didn't mean conformity. And that was astounding to me. I thought anytime I became part of a group, I was going to lose myself. And here I found a group of people that really celebrated individuality, and they built better things together, not because of money or prestige necessarily, but for many of the people is because they just loved creating, and that transformed my life. That was the same time I went to school to become a psychologist. So I was learning empathy in the real world as I was learning about it as a skill. And I then embraced vulnerability. And I think this is why when you mentioned that vulnerability is strength, it really hit me, because something I started to realize is it was a lot more painful for me to be a leader in the Burning Man community as somebody who cared than it ever did when I was a martial arts instructor. Because that ability to be in my ego and that ability to be focused on getting people where they wanted to go and not caring as much about their feelings, and to be successful in my own right and not to care in the same way about what people thought about me. It was a lot easier to be objectively successful and a clear, decisive leader than it was when I was leading my friends. Because when they got upset, when they disapproved, when they misinterpreted how I was being or what my intentions were, that hurt and it felt personal. And it really could weigh on me quite a bit. And so this idea that vulnerability was strength, it wasn't true in that same way. Mm-hmm. And so when you said it, this is kind of where it kind of came back to me, where I'm like, well, something I've realized is that sometimes strength is strength too. Yeah. And I'm always trying to find how to do that better, because as someone who wants to do a lot and wants to be authentic and caring, but also wants to be successful and to do meaningful things, figuring that dialectic out and getting that rhythm, that's so important.
Yeah. And in a way, if you're never actually vulnerable and experience being authentically hurt, and I would say a bunch of times, that grows a real strength. And if you're invulnerable or just always dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's, making sure that everything is entirely safe for yourself all the time, you're actually more vulnerable for when something gets through your armor, and unprepared in that way. My sister just said today was my sister's birthday, and I was hanging out with her, and we had a moment of reflecting on how she used to antagonize me intensely and intentionally. She was a master of upsetting me. But she said, but that grew some character. It's like now I'm much more resilient to insult and really kind of I can have my chops busted really, really thoroughly, because she was really, really excellent at that. I thought too, when you're saying of I guess this is an example of a meme or a proverb, a bit of wisdom that applies at some moments and doesn't. I have a friend. He goes by Space Dragon when he does poetry art, and he had this really brilliant poem that was an acronym for love, and he made it stand for losing one's very existence. And it was very, very well crafted to be like an intellectual argument against being vulnerable in romantic love, because you will lose your very existence. And it made great, cogent, solid points. And so when I think that sometimes with us humans, like you just say experienced a failure, or you just tried to be vulnerable in a romantic relationship and it went terribly awry. That's a moment where it's good to be like, hey, let's YouTube a poem that will back up how I'm feeling right now. And then in a few months, it's like, you know what? I think I'm going to get back into trying to lose my very existence with someone, because that has some good things about it. And it's just different times. I never thought I would be able to drive a stick shift, and then a friend of mine offered a Mustang, and that is a manually shifting vehicle, and I had to, so I did learn. And one of the things that has shown me through it's a visceral metaphor when I'm driving that car, that life is like a manually shifting vehicle. Or like there's a meme. My friend Halcyon of the Pink Heart Camp at Burning Man, his proverb is float more, steer less, love more, fear less. Love more, fear less, love more, fear less, float more, steer less. But it's like sometimes, and he agrees with this now, it's like there are moments where it seems you really got to steer. You got to put it into a specific gear and fucking try to control the situation.
But with Halcyon, I think he already includes the dialectics in that meme. He's mentioning both sides, where so many of the memes don't. He's not saying to float all the time, like only float. He'd be then a clown in a Stephen King novel. That he's saying float more, steer less. Because I think the natural tendency for so many people in the West is to steer. He's acknowledging that dialectics. That's a beautiful example of what we're talking about. And I think this kind of comes back to that idea of people who are kind of attached to non-attachment in their relationships. I think you see this a lot in the poly camps, where it's this idea where like sometimes people hold on to a non-attachment so strongly that they literally believe that they should not care about the direction of a relationship. And they shouldn't try to build something with somebody else that is a common dream. And I think that becomes a challenge. It's also part of the reason why I'm not a Buddhist. I think Buddhism works really well for people who would like to move to a mountaintop and to escape the world. And I've always talked about there being two different types of Zen. There's mountaintop Zen and there's samurai Zen, right? There's these approaches to Buddhism that from certain perspectives could almost be viewed as escapist. Well, yeah, if you're not in a relationship and you're not in a work environment and you're not engaging in politics and you're not like putting on events with other people, non-attachment appears to get a little easier. But how good is your Zen if you're only practicing it away from life, from all of these conflicts and all of these entanglements? So if the goal is to truly leave this world, then yes, that makes sense. Or if it's to find some enlightenment outside of those entanglements, that makes sense too. But I'm the sort of person where I really admire and make use of the techniques of Buddhism in my own work. I've done it when I taught martial arts. I do it in the forms of therapy that I do, but I have absolutely no desire to leave this interaction with other people. Like, to me, that's what makes this world worth living. So using mindfulness and Zen techniques and this concept of non-attachment to live my life more gracefully, I think is something that I enjoy. However, pure non-attachment, I don't find that works for people who are still trying to live an active, engaged life with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I've experienced myself being too far on either end of well, I've definitely experienced myself like looking around and being like, it does seem like I am going about my life in a way where it's like I'm married to non-monogamy, or just generally like I'm married to chaos. And
Sure.
and when I first started realizing how structure can create freedom, and how waking up in the morning with no plans sometimes leads to decision anxiety and leads to doing nothing. And I don't want to do nothing. I've never been. I wish to have moments of nothingness and the regenerative disassociation in Zen. But ultimately, I think we incarnated into a world with a lot of available meaning and games to decide are important and play them fully. And I want to do that. But I also I just, yeah, for me it's like my seeking Zen moments is about upkeep often. Yeah, and right now it's been a boon for me with the recent coronavirus global crisis, and I feel like I experienced having all of my plans for 2020 and my income and everything entirely dashed in it with a news bulletin.
Yeah.
Didn't fuck me up very much emotionally. It was not I have not experienced it as a painful, or it hasn't felt very precarious all the time. There have been moments of like, whoa, this really is chaos, and it seems to be not stabilizing. and yeah, I want to be as I want to exude as much empathy as I can for that. I notice sometimes when I'll just say things like, these people think that you can count on structure, or I really like the quote, our biggest problem is we think we have time. Yeah, but I want to empathize for just how worrisome it is for some to be in chaotic times.
Oh yeah, right. I mean, this is a shock unlike anything else that, as a collective group, we have ever came across. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit in the last episode, that not since World War II has the entire world felt under threat at the same time. And whether this is the threat of the virus, or the threat that the government's going to make use of the virus, or something of that nature, everybody in some level, way, shape, or form is kind of feeling threatened on some level. And it's been really interesting for me because this is one of those areas where, funnily enough, cryptocurrency has really prepared me for this moment. And the one thing that you learn, it's what's interesting about cryptocurrency is it moves. People think you shouldn't get into it because it's so volatile. And it has been one of the best educations for me out of all of the things that I've done, in the sense that cryptocurrency teaches me that when other people are freaking out, this is the time to look for opportunities. If you believe that in general something's going to get better, that when there are problems, this is where you can take advantage of things. So this is going to sound weird. You mentioned earlier that structure is freedom. I have worked very hard in order to pursue a career that, for one of the reasons why I pursue it, provides a certain degree of stability to me. And strangely enough, this is luckily one of the least interesting things you can talk about, but I'm super geeked about it. I just refinanced my house so that I'm going to be paying the exact same monthly payments that I've been paying currently, and I'm going to pay my house off 15 years earlier. And so instead of 30 years, I'm going to pay it off in 15 years, paying the same monthly payments. And I've been freaking out about whether I might lose my job. I've been freaking out because of politics. I've been freaking out about the events that I wanted to do being canceled. So I've been feeling this fear and this threat, but at the same time, in the dialectic, I'm also realizing that there's opportunities here. So I have been crazy busy. At the same time, I'm freaking out, going, okay, let's get every single opportunity that I can, even while I'm freaking out, because this is the time to do it. And finding that balance there.
Yeah, there was a rectangular image style meme that I saw when we first went into lockdown that was saying, if you don't come out of this with a new learned skill, or you know, all the some personal growth, or finishing the things that you've been putting off, you don't lack time, you lack discipline. And this happens a lot in the memeverse. Then somebody else regenerated that and drew a red line through you don't lack time, you lack discipline, and said you're doing just fine. You don't have to you don't have to it's a privileged perspective to see this as opportunity. For some people it's like, if you survive, you're good.
And I think that's the dialectic.
Yeah.
That's the dialectic. I am freaking out. And there's hours when I just sit in the couch staring at the ceiling because life is changing and going to be unrecognizable in some ways.
Yeah.
And then I'm also getting up and I'm working. And I think that's this idea of what we're talking about, is you can make a rhythm of this. Like, it is useful and productive to sit in existential crisis, because if you don't face that fear and you don't face this uncertainty, you don't take it seriously, you're not really processing what's going on. So you need to do that. But if you never stop doing that and you're just going through gallons of ice cream and that's all you do, well, that creates more crisis in your life. And that idea that you're okay no matter how you are, well, I don't know how useful that is. I don't know how self-honoring that is, to try to say, no, it's okay if you just completely collapse all the time.
Yeah.
Or that you collapse through your way through this crisis. Because honestly, I don't think this crisis ends for 2 years. So if you're spending this whole 2 years collapsed, it's gonna be a long 2 years.
Yeah. A lot of conjectures have been flying out of my mouth, but then I always try to remind myself and to say at the end, well, I don't know what's going to happen right now. But it seems pretty darn certain that uncertainty will be abound. And yeah, that the productivity and not wanting to be shaming oneself for judging one's behaviors as lazy is something that I struggle with a lot. Well, I don't say struggle. So I find that my most productive time, my best productivity, is experienced as effortless, and particularly with creativity, it's that the flow state, that is where so much good stuff flies out of me, as where when I'm straining and efforting and trying to achieve that zone, it's a trickle, and it usually sucks. And it's just that's why I found that it is good for me to have tasks that I can always engage in that are so mechanical, left-brained, that mindless, and also that detaching and spending time in full rest. There's R&R, and I like to say FFO is fully fucking off. That serves the moment when I then snap back into productivity gear and actually do things. But yeah, and back to structure can create freedom, like through a repeated regiment and a daily schedule. That's when the best stuff happens, because you definitely can't expect yourself to be in that very productive mode 24/7. You will then crash. It's like sometimes when I see a very inconsiderate motorist who is racing to every red light, and ends up getting to their destination either at the same time as all of us, or attracting the attention of a police officer and then getting there way later, or causing an accident and then possibly not getting there at all. Like that, I try to avoid that, but the memes sometimes, like they can be this thing that has been justifying my behavior, or like will light a fire under me, but I don't find that guilting myself into productivity works the best.
I do that. I find that it works in small doses, right? And I think this is where we kind of come with that dialectic again, like this idea that yelling at kids is bad, but if a kid's about to run into traffic, someone's like, "Oh, what the fuck are you doing? Stop!"
Yeah,
might be a good idea, right? Because there's nothing else that's going to get that kid's attention in the same way. And I find it's true with me sometimes. Like I believe that, yeah, if you're constantly habitually judging yourself for not being good enough, that's probably not really healthy. But if you do find that, I do find that if I've been fucking off all day and maybe I've been self-pitying and I've been caught up in stuff, and I suddenly go, Eric, what the fuck are you doing? Get off your ass. Like,
yeah, it works.
You want to live, that it does light a bit of a fire under me. And it does get me moving. Yeah. And I think that's that dialectic again, that just good things are not always good. Kind things are not always kind.
Yeah. It's certainly like that with exercise. I find I am always happy that I got up and started moving. However, I guess the one thing that just guilt, just like felt shame of one's own recent behaviors doesn't seem to be constructive at all. It's just like when you're the empty worrying of just feeling bad, there's no productive element. No, there can be worrying and then trying to take precautions, and that is a way in which fear can be helpful. I mean, for some people, there's the trampoline of rock bottom of like looking around and being like, this is not the fucking life that I want. And I feel like a loser. And now I'm going to spring into action and change it. That does happen sometimes. I guess it's just like.
And I want to jump in there. I think this is another example of when kindness is harmful, is that a lot of times people don't hit rock bottom because there's one or two people there supporting them in their bad behavior. Like a lot of times people don't hit rock bottom until the people who care the most finally go, fuck this, and they walk away for a bit.
Yeah.
And then that's when the other person finally goes, they can't escape the consequences of their own actions.
Yeah. Enabling is not kind. It's like,
but it is at first, right? Because most people who you are kind to, you're not enabling until you are.
Yeah. Right? It's just when a moment you it's like, when you're there, and that's another meme that definitely has a paradox about it. Is the cutting toxic people out of your life.
Yeah.
Like that's been a very popular meme for a bit now. And there's moments where that is so applicable, and that is exactly what somebody who struggles being assertive when they need to be to protect themselves, like really needs to hear that it's okay for you to cut toxic. Now I would argue with the word just declaring someone a toxic individual. I don't know what the metric for that is. Everybody has their negative, their shadow elements. And yeah, there's definitely like, there's some individuals at times in their life where they really need to hear that it is okay and encouraged for you to have a self-defense of your space and your time and your energy, and to cut someone that you observe as toxic out of your life. But then that would be the definition of trying to be emotionally invulnerable, is that I'm not going to tolerate anyone's difficult attributes or behaviors at all and just cut them out.
This has been one of the interesting things about being like an organizer in a creative community filled with people who have different views, different perspectives, different ways of approaching relationships and sexuality and gender and politics and everything under the sun. When you're somebody who creates in this same environment, and to take a view that when somebody hurts you or disagrees with you, or you feel guilty or challenged or all these other things, and you need to cut someone out, this also kind of fractures communities. If everybody who hurt me or betrayed me or talked badly about me or all of these, or talked badly to someone else, if every one of these people were cut out, like like, this is the nature
Yeah.
of a group of diverse individuals. This
Yeah.
is what diversity is about. Now, I think that you're right in extreme forms where someone is like truly like maliciously socio or psychopathic, where they are truly out for their own game and gain, and they revel in hurting others. That yes, these human beings, if they shouldn't be in jail, it makes sense to ostracize them. But that's maybe 1% of the population, if that, right? Out of
Yeah.
maybe 1% of 1%, like 1 out of every 1,000 really deserves that level of interaction
Yeah.
or
And
cutting out. I mean,
that's a very complicated and I would just say difficult role to be in, to because if you have a community, especially an artistic community or something like Burning Man, or I've hosted this thing Nonsense Night, if a precedent is set that it's not a safe place to mess up socially, because there's these infractions that are definitely not intentional wrongdoing, and then and then there I would say that there are lines that you don't cross, and that there are certain behaviors that I don't think a safe person has that in their arsenal, and now an unsafe psyche can be brought to being more socialized and considerate of others, but if you have an environment like a festival, like a Burning Man event or a Nonsense Night, where one of the Nonsense Night is not supposed to be defined, but one of the defining factors is that this is a place where you are free to experiment. People don't feel that safety or encouragement if they observe it having rigid rules. And there was a moment at the last Lakes of Fire festival where I, for the first time in my Burning Man career, if you will, went to get rangers to get a person ejected, and I observed. It was clear to me at this point that this is not a warning. Like, this person, this is not a safe festival while this person is marauding about. Because I was observed him at times I was with a gaggle of friends, and he was approaching women and like just getting like not salty, but very very physical with them, like touching their hair and whatnot, and clearly being signaled of like not and he was doing it to everyone that he passed. So we as a group decided to evade him, but I was like, let's keep this guy in our side eye though, because it's like, okay, we're escaping this person in this situation, but he is I call this marauding, what he's doing. And then we saw him mess with some people's stuff in their camp, just clearly fucking with people's property. So he's touching people, he's messing with property. And so it's like, usually I tend to err on the side of freedom, but a certain level of chaos like that is not met with some authority, some structure, some reprimanding. Now the whole place isn't a free, safe to be chaotic zone anymore.
And I think that's the other part of that, is that a lot of times that there's been a lot of people within this community that when that happens, me included, that you go up and you have a conversation with that person and you take them aside. And if they're not in a place to be able to talk about it at that time because they're inebriated, then you're going to like, well, we're going to follow this up. And then you follow it up. And I've had probably over the last 15, 17 years, I probably had about a dozen really difficult conversations with about a dozen different people at multiple times that in some cases were ongoing for 9 months about their behavior. Because if they want to have the freedom to act that way and they haven't literally actually crossed any legal boundaries, rather than just kicking them out, and this has been sometimes exhausting on my part, Doxy's another person who does a lot of this, that we will come in and we will have extended behind the scenes conversations with these people about their behavior. And what we don't do is we don't just cut them out and exclude them, but we also don't let them off the hook for what they're doing. And I have to admit that some of the most exhausting sleepless nights have come from the drama that's come out of this, because one of the other pressures we've gotten a lot of times is, as a leader in the community, there are many people who just want this simple, again, that one half of that dialectic, cut this person off, cut them out of the community. And I'm like, so that what? They can go do this somewhere else?
Yeah.
Like if you don't approach a person about their bad behavior, if someone doesn't do this and they truly are predators, they just become a predator somewhere else. And chances are they're not a predator. What I've found most of the time is that the person's awkward, they're unsure, they're caught up in a substance abuse disorder, and they're confused and hurting like so many people are. And they've often had their boundaries crossed. So finding someone who's willing to take the time to actually work with them, not in all cases, but at least in a third to half of the cases, I found led that person to acting very differently down the road. And to me, that's kind of the end goal of an open community like this is, how do you help acculturate people so that they can be free and be chaotic and be expressive in ways that are responsible?
Yeah. That makes me think, don't tread on me. I would say that's a meme. It is also a yellow flag with a snake on it. And so
I saw that same flag with, I'm bad at epidemiology. I don't know how diseases work. Yeah.
Oh, I saw here's a very bad meme proverb. I saw a sign at the Lansing protest for Michiganders against quarantine Operation Gridlock that said, "My body, my choices, COVID-19." And that is so ironic that they have flipped around a pro-choice meme, a pro-choice phrase, and made it about I get to decide to put my body at risk. And then obviously I would then argue back at that it is not only your body that you are putting at risk. And so I bring up "don't tread on me" because that's a meme, a proverb, a turn of phrase of the anti-authoritarian element that at times is that is the dialectic that I am seeing right now. It's like, here's an example where I observe that this is a moment where having a government and having authority has really been helpful, because to have, well, I mean, obviously could have been a lot more helpful, but there being some unifying voice that said, okay, everybody everywhere, we need to shelter in place, that has, I think, objectively saved lives. But there are those who their relationship with authority is to always be suspicious of it, which it sometimes makes me feel safer knowing that there is that reaction amongst us to be like, to always want to check authority because overreach will be attempted. And there's a Venn diagram going around that is it's three things that you can both be concerned and taking the virus seriously, also being concerned about government overreaching, and what was the third one? Yeah, I don't know, but anyway, but people think those things are exclusive, that right. you're either on team anti-authority or like we need to lock down and thank God for our savior, the state, for persuading us to do so. And it's so both.
And this is the thing. I think that people who are thinking all or nothing terms always assume that when you're talking about like a dialectical resolution, that you're looking to understand the truth in both sides of an argument to find the best path forward, that you're arguing against them. When it becomes really difficult, because almost everybody goes, well, if you think that you should include people, then you're going to include, then you stand for abusers. Or if you believe that you should open the economy at some point, then you want grandma to die. And I'm like, well, no, but at some point we do need to open the economy, because what's going to happen is people die from poverty too. People die from broken dreams. Like, there are other things besides this virus that hurt and kill people. And if we have if the world economy goes into another Great Depression like we saw in the 1920s, I mean, like, that wasn't a bed of roses there, right? So I think the same thing applies here. I want to come back to a comment that Amy left. What happens when those people never get talked to? or if they're in positions of power?
Mhm.
And I guess that's a good question, which is really the question comes back to, well, what do you do? Because there is nobody else. There is, but you don't have any control about what other people do. And this is why, for me, when I have the energy and I have the availability as a leader within my community, and I see someone acting clearly, what to me is clearly badly, and it seems to be within my area. So if I'm hosting an event and I see this at an event, or I'm at a friend's event and they trust me to take this role, then
Mhm.
I generally will take that role. But there's other times where it's not my place because I don't know what's going on.
Mhm.
And so I guess the question then gets turned back, which is, how do you as an individual see a person who is different than how you are? And how do you choose to interact with them in a way that creates a dialogue? And that dialogue implies two sides. And this is what we're really getting at with these dialectics and paradoxes, which is, how do you work with a person to reconcile their point of view, their perspective, their sense of empathy, their sense of fairness, their sense of logic, their desires, hopes, dreams, and fears with your own? And how do you find the skills to be able to stand up and be assertive, to communicate effectively, and have the strength to do that? And that's going to be different for different people at different times.
Yeah, different people, different times, and different moments with different personalities, for
Yeah.
sure. It all just comes down to that you can't paint with a broad stroke brush. I think there's a contradictory proverb to that, though. Don't paint with a broad streak brush, but also that sometimes sometimes there's definitely things that you don't approach surgically. There's not a one size fits all.
And no. And I mean, the honest truth is too, that this has a cost to it. I think about one time in particular where me and Doxy, I'm not going to mention who was involved here. But Doxy and I stepped into a situation where there were two people, they were both wrong to each other, that there were different parts of the community that wanted both of them kicked out. And we had to make a really hard choice to get involved. And you know what? I got burnt out. It took so much energy to get involved with that and not to make the simple choice of just kicking them out, that I was like exhausted and had to step back from all community things for like 6 months after that. And so I think part of the thing here that we're talking about is sometimes it's easier to take these extreme and simple views because it's less effortful. And
absolutely.
it's easier to just go cut them out or ignore it. Right.
Absolutely. I see that a lot in, as we say, conspiracy theories, or I'm watching, I'm trying to learn like what the mechanism of this is, but it seems like there's a lot of instances where someone is fighting for a simplified, sinister adversary.
Oh, and I think this is important. I wanted to mention this, so I'm glad that you're bringing it up.
Yeah, like that because it doesn't. I mean, one, I'm just not convinced. I've really spent some time looking into some things that were very and it seems like there's some folks that are articulate and intelligent in ways. I think there's different forms of intelligence, but we haven't really been flexing the muscle of our own having an intellectual self-defense of ourselves. Like I noticed that myself, that when I'm trying to find when I'm trying to locate and name a boogeyman, as opposed to what it really seems like what the big problem in the world is that these are things about us. These are tendencies that we have as humans, and they're manifesting in all levels of society. And it really does not appear to me that the elimination of a person or any one group is going to be our salvation. I think we have a very complex process I think it's the safe ahead of us.
Safe thing to take. Don't want to eliminate groups of people. I think that's
a group as in like the Illuminati, as it were. That there's going to be there's a club that if they were stopped from doing their evil, that everything would right itself. I think we just have a really complicated problem. It's like there are households where hoarding has been happening for a very long time, and it is difficult to look at that pile of stuff and be like, I'm gonna have to sort and get rid of some of this, and some of it but I'm not gonna throw the baby out with the bathwater and burn the house down. However, that would solve my problem of no more hoarding. There is like there are some like knots that seem to have to be untied. And it's going to have to be specific and tact and surgical and a case by case basis. Yeah, and I see the oversimplification of taking sides.
So I think this comes back to why I was really glad that you brought this up, which is memes are sports ball for people who don't like sports and for people who do. It's another way. It leads us into tribalism, that when everybody is espousing the same strong dichotomy, the same all or nothing thinking, the same black and white thinking, that it's easy to go, this is my tribe, this is my people. Life is more important than the economy. And then you get the other team going, no, the economy is more important. I'm going to sacrifice my life so that people around me can have prosperity and do well, because I want my kids not to live in poverty and to have a world that's a Mad Max wasteland, right? And now you've got these two opposing sides, and it's really easy and fun for them to fight against each other. And then what they do is this side goes, well, these people are hippies and think that everybody, because a few people are going to die, that this is the most horrible thing ever, and that no one should ever die, and that everybody should be handled with kid gloves and live in a bubble, and that we can be poor and the state will somehow protect everybody. And this is what they believe. And they make a straw man out of the most extreme of the other side. This side goes, no. All of you just want to kill grandma and my nephew with an autoimmune disease. And none of you care about humanity at all. And life is always more important than the economy. And here's the challenge. Both of those are false arguments. That those are both these dichotomies, this all or nothing thinking, that it just perpetuates the combat, the fight, and the identifying with your tribe, with your team, without actually coming to a real workable solution, which is what we're going to need over the long term.
Yeah, especially in the position that we're in. To go into politics is such an arena to go into, but I noticed myself when Bernie Sanders was a viable option as a candidate for president. Well, at first I supported Andrew Yang, and then as soon as Andrew Yang dropped out, it was interesting because one of the things that their campaign slogans. So Yang's was not, it's not left, it's not right, it's forward, and that to me does seem to be like to be pragmatic in the situation that we're in. The right left fight, the Pepsi versus Coca-Cola red and blue thing, it seems to me to create and it keeps us in a state of gridlock so much that it almost seems designed at times, because it seems to be so paralyzing for change. And so I saw him as I saw him as one as having the potential to get beyond that divide and be a unifier. But then as soon as he was out, it was like, okay, now my option is Bernie, and there was a lot that I really like about Bernie. But then I became a Bernie supporter, and I had to get aligned with all of the talking points in order to support fully. And saw myself drinking the poison of why I think so many people choose very intentionally to I vote and I don't discuss it. I don't, because these things become very, very empty arguments, especially when people who are identifying with contrasting sides. It becomes such an unproductive use of mouth sounds sometimes, and you don't move. Nobody moves a bit. And people just move further to their side. And so where we're actually at right now, I see it's going to be such a process and such a chess match and a long-term process to be brought more to what I see as an ideal state of society.
So I want to actually pose a question to our audience. Now that we're talking about dialectics, so we're talking about how it's so easy to fall into one half of an overall thought and go that this half of the overall thought is what's right and good, and this other half is what's bad and wrong. And I'm curious what the audience thinks in terms of what are those dialectics that you fell into where you realize that you identified with one half of a bigger argument, where both sides are necessary to figure out how to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's political, whether that's relationship advice, whether that's how you motivate yourself, whether that's how you take care of your body. So what comes to mind is that whole movement that goes, the body positivity movement, where you just don't care about how you look, and however you look is beautiful. And there in any pressure in order for you to become more fit or healthy is bad and wrong. And I kind of look at that now in terms of COVID. I'm like, if you literally are living that in like 5 different ways, you are now more at risk for this disease, right? And I think that comes back to what we're talking about before, is that self-judgment versus accepting yourself, which is, well, is it so wrong to sometimes feel bad in order to motivate yourself to live more fully and be healthier, as long as it's done purposefully and is done with balance? So I guess this is what I'm asking those who are watching, which is, what are those things where you know that you've kind of taken the team or the side of a strong thought, and you kind of later realize, wow, I need some balance here.
Yeah, and I think that is when it has always helped. I don't want to say make me smarter, but complexified and brought a more. I'd say just it makes me smarter when I am cogently disagreed with, and when I'm being a purist about something. And I think that being open to that, like being super on a vulnerability kick, vulnerability is strength kick. Like I remember when I was a child, whatever was the last movie that I saw, like if I just saw Batman, I'm dressing up like Batman, and all I want to be is Batman for a week or so, until that gets boring. And then I was very big on phases, and now it's StarCraft, and now it's this, and I would always identify with the thing that I was. So I saw the Brene Brown TED Talk and absorbed her book, and was on such a kick that was the only thing that was my the meme that I was running with. And then you start to notice more situations where it's not working out with you to have this one size fits all solution, and then somebody articulates it, and then it's like, yeah, you're right. There's definitely there's achieving what we call a non-dual state is sure pleasant, but there I do observe a world of duality.
So yeah, Emily asks, do you ever alter your belief towards a more middle ground when someone questions yours? And I would say, because dialectics, I've learned the importance of dialectics. I've learned how much getting caught up in one half of a dichotomous truth can cause problems in my life. Kind of like Zach said, when I realize that I believe something and it works part of the time, but it's really painful a bunch of the other time, that's usually a clue to me that I'm missing something there. And it's especially at those times where I'm feeling that pain in my own life, where I kind of welcome someone going, well, maybe you should approach it this way. And first part of me, my pride goes, I'm still kind of attached to that team. Like our team vulnerability is strength. I'm like, but if I'm just vulnerable and I'm feeling more pain, that means I'm stronger. Well, maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't be feeling that much pain. Maybe feeling a little bit of pain strength, but allowing myself to like constantly be in pain because I'm too open, I'm too caring, I'm too empathetic, I don't have enough boundaries. Maybe that's actually just taking my energy away. So maybe I can let go of that pride and find more of a middle ground there for me. How about for you? Like when people argue with you, what's your process of like integrating that other side?
I remember after Donald Trump was elected, I went on a sort of research quest to intellectually understand conservative ideology as much as I could, and not just in a way of like understanding thy enemy sort of thing, because for most of my life that was I was born into a family that were blue team Pepsi leaning, and then I am presented with this character that seemed villainous to me, and and policies that went against my values so starkly. But I to walk around in a world where there is just a bad team, evil team, and for it to be like winning, it was that was not a comfortable nor productive place to be in any way. I wanted to understand things, and I just absorbed a lot of people that I saw as not being just zombified ideologues that were explaining things and arguing their case. And with that understanding, now if I find myself in a situation where there is a person who I will disagree with highly on several points, issues, that it's like the moment of just you're wrong and stupid is so unproductive, and I can always expand upon it's not just about like strengthening your ability to argue. Once again, there is a just by adding scope to my understanding. So that's the political sphere. But then there have been times where I have really been immersed in a phase or a meme. I had my gothy teens and adolescence, and then I wanted to push back against that, and I went into a very naively hippy dippy late Beatlesy phase, and then there was a moment where I was obsessed with being like a gray Jedi, infinite rainbow nightmare spectrum, like always middle path sort of thing. But that gets a bit parochial to be married to neutrality, and I don't think it's good to be indifferent here. It's just a really it's a really complex enterprise being honest in the world. Showing up in different situations and staying honest.
Yeah, and I think that's that interplay, because to be honest sometimes is to kind of, because the way we're talking about it isn't a linear path. It isn't this is who I am all of the time and this is right all the time. It's understanding that sometimes greed is good, and sometimes vulnerability is strength, and sometimes stoicism is strength. And it's really confusing. Like this is part of why I love that we're doing this podcast, is because the more I'm forced to talk about things in new ways, the easier it becomes to wrap my brain around how to do that thing. And I do dialectics in the sense of my work all of the time. And at the same time, now that we're talking about like, how do we talk about this with our friends? How do we talk about this with just people in general? Because I find that when I take the middle ground approach with other people, like I've said before, they often think that I'm arguing against them. So how do I get better at really try to find a way to communicate this better? And in myself, there becomes that complex piece of, to be honest, I'm bad at certain things and I fail and I mess up. And sometimes I hurt people, and sometimes other people hurt me. And it's because of this weakness or this part of myself that's been stuck in this thing that other people realize when they're 12. And here I am 45 and I haven't figured it out. Like that sort of honesty is hard because it causes pain. And there's that part when those dialectics comes back again, that pain is bad. And I think not the first time, but one of the most profound ways that I learned that pain isn't bad is in teaching the martial arts. And it wasn't my own pain, Like there's that idea, no pain, that no gain. And the tougher you get, the tougher you are, right? That's a very common dialectic. I realized that in terms of me hitting my students, that for a while, when I was a young instructor and I got thrown on the floor because of circumstances outside of my control, I wanted to run a martial arts studio, but I didn't want to run it when I was 120 pounds and 22 years old. And I had Marines on my floor who had seen combat. Like that was a lot. And here I was, this kind of sensitive, nice kid who was good for my weight class, but I didn't want to cause other people pain and discomfort. So what happened was I was a competent instructor. I was a good instructor, and some of my students were really talented, but I wasn't always using the force that I should be using as my students go up in rank. And so some of my brown belts and some of my black belts, I wasn't hitting them when they're open, and that felt good because I'm like, oh, they'll be fine, until they got in an actual fight. Or they went into a sparring match and they got hit in the same openings that I wasn't hitting them in the studio. And what I realized there is that in a consenting environment where people were in there in order to learn how to be stronger and tougher, I was doing them a disservice by not hitting them for the level of training that they had, because it gave them a false sense of confidence and a false sense of strength. And I kind of came up with this saying, it's better to be hit by someone who respects you than to go on the street and get hit there with someone who's not going to stop. Mm-hmm. And that was a really profound lesson. And so I look for that in other places where, again, when it comes back to me, like, when is it good to judge myself so that I do push myself to be better? But how do I do that purposefully in a way that actually makes me grow and doesn't disrespect me? Because if I'm disrespecting myself through judging myself, that's not helpful. If I'm respecting myself by being harsh and that moves me forward, then that's a really high form of self-respect, I believe.
Yeah, and I do think having the most respect for myself and being the most loving towards myself is, for me, in my value system and how I want my life to play out, is whatever gets me to that optimum state of, because it's not a goal. I'm done with the meme of being goal oriented so much as have goals. They're little mile markers. It's nice to reach that. But being process oriented and deriving the joy from the process or the journey, if you will, that seems to me to be more aligned and conducive with how reality actually plays out. Because it seems like the several billionaires who are talkative about what that experience was like, yeah, I was happy for a few weeks. It was a trophy. It was something to become rich, was something that I really wanted for a while. And then it became normal. And so it definitely seems like life is an enterprise of shopping for meaning and also creating it and reinforcing that. I mean, there's an upkeep to keeping your efforts, your quests feeling meaningful to you. And
what you're talking about there is called the hedonic treadmill effect. Have you heard of that term before?
Being on the hedonic treadmill. So
yeah, it's the idea that we're seeking extrinsic reinforcers. So those things that are outside of ourselves that are momentarily pleasurable, that the more we get them, the less pleasurable they become. Uh-huh. So you can think about why that would be useful. So like if you're like a caveman and you're out collecting berries and all you do is you love berries, so you just sit by this huge berry tree and that's all you do all day long is eat berries, and it doesn't lose its reinforcement value, you're going to just develop diabetes, fall over and die, because you're not getting proper nutrition. You're not getting the meats and you're not getting the vegetables. Mm-hmm. So the more that we get pleasurable things, whether this is sex or certain types of food or money or these external goals, the less reinforcing it becomes until we move away from it for a while. So like you look at it, if you got a room full of 5-year-olds and you give them a piece of chocolate, they're like, fuck yeah, chocolate. And you give them another piece of chocolate, yeah, chocolate. But if you keep doing that every 5 minutes, after an hour, they're like puking in the corner. they're wanting Twizzlers. They're wanting to eat their carrots. They want anything but chocolate at that point. So the other idea here is that this has to be balanced with intrinsic reinforcers. These are those things that just by doing them, you feel more yourself or more fulfilled. And so in ACT, we call those values. And when you find your values, these are the things that keep you fulfilled over time. And you can set your goals based on those. And those tend not to run out in the same sort of way. You can keep that appreciation and gratitude there.
Yeah. Yeah. The constant search for novelty. Sometimes for me, like a good example is if I were to monogamy at this point, having not really done that since I was 17, and that was teenager stuff. It would be very novel for me to experience a long-term relationship. It would be like, wow, this is zany territory we're getting into. So we're like making actual efforts to like make it work and stuff. That was never part of my rubric before. If something started having systemic failures, you just scuttle the boat. There's other boats. And so that would be very novel for me. And it's almost like the movie SLC Punk. I feel like the parable of that is you have all this intentional effort to be outside of the status quo, to not be the norm, to rebel and not conform, and then it becomes a conformity of non-conformity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that with all things. And
you can't accept the other half of that dialectic. And I think this is where the shadow comes in. The more you suppress one half of the equation, the more it's going to fuck you up.
Mm-hmm.
So the person who's always giving and always kind is finally going to snap because nobody appreciates them. Right? The person who believes that wealth is going to buy them love and respect and care and understanding is going to find themselves alone. Like that, the more you live in an extreme, the more that you're going to, whether that's kindness or greed, the more that you're going to suffer. That if you don't recognize both halves of yourself in that equation, that you're going to be out of balance by definition.
Yeah. The only thing to fear is fear itself. Is a proverb, is a meme that there's times where I experience it being very, very clear to me that what I am afraid of right now is not actually a certain outcome that is dangerous. I'm afraid that I might get afraid because it's scary when I'm afraid. But now there's a situation where there's a real tactile objective threat. And it's not, and the only thing to fear is not fear itself. It's the thing that you want to be precautious about.
Right. And it's, there's a situation years ago when I was a martial artist where I was on this kind of roll and I was in these sparring tournaments. And so people who were in my weight class and they were my rank, I was just kind of like, I was just going through it and I was winning. So when that fear would come up, it was like the only thing to fear is fear itself. And then there's this thing where suddenly, because of politics, they kind of threw the rules by the wayside and they're like, well, this guy's winning enough, so let him go fight out of his weight class. And I'm like, the only thing to fear is fear itself. And I got in the ring with this guy and I'm like, you can't argue with physics, right? There's weight classes for a reason. And I realized this guy had like 80 pounds on me and he was as skilled as me. And there was real reason to fear. So I had to I came out of that with a broken nose, and I came out of that with it could have been even worse. And it's something where I could have, instead of letting my pride and that proverb carry me forward, I could have walked out and I would have been a lot more productive over the next 3 weeks. But as it was, I'm kind of glad I did it. It was a good learning experience. But yeah, fear is not the only thing to fear. Someone who's got 80 pounds of muscle on you, that can be scary for a very good reason.
the reason for not touching the orange glowing coils inside the toaster isn't that you're afraid of them.
Right.
It reminds me of a moment where I got really upset at a friend using memes at a time where I felt like it really didn't apply. This is when, and I've had this a bunch with people, because I associate with folks who are into some esoteric reality tunnels, worldviews of say words like energy and such. Certain that has been called galaxy brained thinking, which is great at times, which can be great for experiencing moments of Zen and having a more easygoing attitude. But when you are driving and I am your passenger, I do not want to hear things like, don't, like when I tell them be careful, and it's like, don't put energy into that. We're cool. It's okay. See, I'm calm. Calm means safety. We create our own reality. It's like, no, right now, I want you to be very afraid of the distinct possibility that we both die or you crash and survive and kill my mother's son and have to deliver that. I want you to be very cautious. And if fear helps, then here's some fear about it. God damn it. Eyes on the road, hands on 10 and 2. This is fucking real right now.
Indeed. Yes. That, what did Bruce Lee say? Don't look at the finger pointing at the moon. Look at the moon, or you'll miss all that heavenly glory. Right?
Yeah.
That a lot of times we mistake the emotion for the thing it represents, and we shoot the messenger in that sense. And whether that's a lack of confidence or that's fear, that you actually have to look at the reality it's pointing to determine whether that emotion is accurate or not.
Yeah, and a lot of life is just seeing what works in different situations, and then there's that grander lesson of learning that one size doesn't fit all. That you find that you get a momentum, and like in your case with martial arts, of like that. Confidence is very helpful at times. And then there's the parable of what has become a parable of the anecdote of the lady lifting up a vehicle to save her kids, like having super strength in this moment of adrenaline. So you can definitely observe that when somebody goes to any physical task or anything with so much doubt of like, will I be able to do it? That doesn't lift cars, that attitude. No. The attitude that lifts cars is, I'm lifting this car. And sometimes that just works. And other times there is a pickle jar that is not just opened with brute force. That there's just, this is a vast menu of different situations, this world. And
so this, I think, maybe brings us to another concept, and maybe we can kind of wrap up on this idea for tonight.
Okay.
And that is, that the map is not the territory.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the challenge. The reason why we have these dichotomies, we have this all or nothing thinking, is the nature of language. Language, we learn how to speak when we're kids, so we have to think in a childlike way, and we don't really grow out of that very well. I think the reason why we're talking about dialectics is it's a very adult way of thinking, and that is, it's one that we don't often talk about, like why that is. So Amy just asked, can you talk more about how it might be human nature to think in all or nothing or black and white thinking? So I think part of the thing here is, when we're raising kids, that we don't have time to talk about we don't have the ability to talk about the in-depth subtleties of how many peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to eat, that you don't eat chalk, and that you don't draw in crayon on the walls, right? We have to say this is good and this is bad, because we don't have time to have 3-hour conversations about every little thing that child is learning. So rules become very easy, and dichotomous statements are very simple, binary, black and white ways to break down the world to a kid. And as we grow up, I think it just stays easy. So you go in the military, and someone gives you an order, like, you don't go to your commander and go, well, sir, I'd like to talk about the finer points of this idea. No, you've got to go over that hill, and you got to take that foxhole on the other side. Like that, the rules are easy. And I think the other reason why we do it is it allows us to, again, pick teams. If I know that supporting the arts and freedom of speech and marrying who you want to marry is good, then I know who my team is. I've got my jersey on and it's got that color on it that matches me with other people. So I think that this is why we think in the black or white thinking, the all or nothing thinking. However, the world isn't just black and white, is not just shades of gray, is not just colors, it's not just three-dimensional. It has sound and it has smell and it has a taste and you can feel it. And it's all of these things. And this kind of comes down to, there's an exercise I sometimes do with people to help them kind of get this concept. And I'll have them point out a whole bunch of objects in the room. And I'll go, what color is that lamp? And they'll say it's red. And I'll go, what color is that plant? And they'll say it's green. And I go, what color is that teapot? And they'll go, it's silver. And I'm like, what color is my watch? And there's black. Okay, go close your eyes. And name all of those things. And then I go, if I gave you $10,000 to remember what those were a year from now, can you name them? They're like, yeah, lamp's red, the plant's green, the watch is black, the pot is silver. And then I have them go, okay, if I give you a bunch of crayons and I was going to give you that $10,000 for accurately drawing that silver pot, what color is it? They're like, well, wait a minute. It's not just one color. It's reflecting all of the things around it. Silver doesn't exist. Silver is reflected color. But if you go in a DeLorean's going down the road, you're not going to say that car is red, yellow, blue, purple, green. As it passes by different things, it's a lot easier to say that it's silver. So a big part of what happens with people is language is always an oversimplification of the complex reality underneath. And when we get caught up in one half of the dichotomy, we're blinding ourselves not to one half of an idea, but we're mistaking one half an idea and mistaking the entire argument for the reality underneath, which is much more complex than that dichotomy ever can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My answer to that why do you think that it's human nature to do nothing, all or nothing, black and white thinking, is that we're coming out of millenniums of survivalism being the state of affairs. And so now we're coming into a time where we have the luxury of dialogue and going over the fine points of things and adding nuance. I don't know who said this, but something like the definition of tyranny is the deliberate removal of nuance. And survivalism is fucking tyrannical. Like being in the jungle, being in the desert, the elements, the jungle that is full of dangerous creatures and itself is trying to swallow you, to kill and swallow you, is not something that you negotiate the nuances with. You have to make a decision and be confident about it. And often in objectivity world of things that are physical dangers, there is usually an answer. This does that, avoid it. So I think that's it. We're coming out of that. And like back to the example of you're getting into politics, or you're assuming a leadership role because you really care about people and you are very emotionally open and vulnerable to your felt empathy for others. But now you're in the position to be able to make a difference, and you got to be bloody assertive. That may be a reason why we all or nothing. Like I was a time I was super into, I love Robert Anton Wilson, but there was a moment where I was really trying to live by the rubric when I talked of I should always say I think, or it seems to me. And if somebody says is, it's always like, oh, no. There is nothing that is.
So you're using E prime, the idea that because the word is implies that what you're stating is absolutely true, you should never use is or forms of be or to be. So you don't say Mozart is better than Beethoven because that's your opinion, that cannot be literally true. So that's what you're talking about. And that's the challenge, is when you talk that way, and this is the dialectic. When you go to people who are used to certainty and you're always qualifying yourself, you don't sound confident to them. But if you start to believe your own certainty, then you start to believe your own lies and you lose touch with the world around you. I think Emily Wargo has a good question here that kind of is based on this. Are we making reality more complex by turning everything into two sides? Competition typically plays a big issue in some of my relationships, and trying not to be right or wrong in those cases have made things a bit better. I'm not sure if choosing sides and agreeing to disagree is better than not having sides. So I'd like to say that actually we argue because we've made things too simple. And we're deciding, you take that half of simplicity and I'm going to take this half of simplicity and I'm going to go, this half of simplicity is right. And I think the world is actually more complex than even joining those two sides together. So this is like, how do I state this eloquently? I keep going to politics. Okay, so since this is where my mind is, might as well go there. So let's kind of go back to this whole COVID thing. One side is saying, be tough, take a risk, open the economy. And that sounds simple. And if you really believe that people are going to be better off, or you're better off because you're strong, you're tough, survival of the fittest, and your grandma's tough and she'll survive this. And if she doesn't, well, you're going to get her inheritance anyway. And now the grandkids will be okay. That sort of thinking is oversimplified. Right? That's literally not all that person is. And the people on the other side go, I can never get sick, and nobody else around me can ever get sick, and grandma can't get sick, and my friend with an autoimmune disorder, and by the way, I have an autoimmune disorder, can't get sick. That's overly simplistic, because eventually the financial blow to these people are going to hurt them as well. That's going to cost. So if we don't step back and realize that both of those are caricatures, that the second I adhere to one caricature, then this is then we lose kind of the nuance in the fact that there is a high wise middle ground that we can use to navigate these situations on a case-to-case basis. And I think this live approach to the world might be more complex, but it's more effective.
And I just remembered the third circle of the Venn diagram of a woke approach to coronavirus concern times, that one can be simultaneously concerned about rise in authoritarianism, government overreach, understand that economic difficulty is a real problem, and that we're going to need to open up at some point, and whilst also taking this seriously and being as careful as you can. Yeah. And the one thing that I'm seeing a lot that is like an inability to perceive the nuance of the situation is that there are those who are being very simplistic in when especially when people make analogies to the flu, and when people say the death rate is this low, and so we don't shut down the economy for that. It's like, but the thing that makes this moment as it is that this is a novel, as a new virus. Nobody has immunities to it, and we're not sending tens of thousands to hospitals every year at the same time for the flu. So that's a situation of like, but this is now, and if you understand these added nuances where this is more complicated than a one sentence answer, and so it becomes I have some friends who are very much completely in the reality tunnel, that it is designed, that it's 5G, Bill Gates sort of things, which I'll say to them at points. It's like, okay, all right, I won't combat your reality tunnel about that. But right now, where we live into the Detroit area, the hospitals are overrun. So even if you think that, right now we do have to take precaution to not go to the packed hospitals and you can't even break your leg. You could be turned away when you have some other problem. Like, so that's where we are right now. Let's have another conversation in May. And sometimes you just got to accept you're not budging somebody from some things that they hold firm, that they're being simplistic about. But
so maybe to wrap this up, let's talk about our dialectical kind of solution for how we're kind of seeing how to move forward at this point with like dealing with this virus in our own personal lives.
Yeah.
So like for you, what is that balance between these things, and how are you trying to find that kind of creatively adaptive path forward for yourself in this moment?
I've noticed that I'm just going to have to be, or it behooves me, I'll have the most optimum time, or like I think I have the best chances of evading the most tragedy and just having the best experience with this. But I got to be on the ball and absorbing as much information that isn't ridiculous to me, and that it's not a simple one-word answer of just put on the hazmat suit and go into my crypt for the next 3 years until things are safe. That's not an answer, and neither is fuck it, I'm going to the beach. That I feel like what I need to do is be analyzing the situation every little while. I do think that it can be really cumbersome on someone's mental health to be immersed in this all day. And yeah, I've been noticed. I've told my mother pretty much that, look, I can be the broker of information. She really doesn't want to be being terrified by the news, especially mainstream news. So I've said that, okay, I'll take on that role of like, I will pay attention to the situation and humbly report to you what I advise for us to behave at this point. Right now, it's shelter in place. And then May 10th, it may be a different conversation, but it's about to be a conversation.
Nice. Yeah. See, for me, it's a matter of, okay, I want to look at, I've been doing a lot of looking at what happens in other pandemics, how they play out. I've been looking at what happens when unemployment crashes like this, when people can't go to work, when you have crises, both so I know what to prepare for and also look for what opportunities there are. So this is part of the reason why I refinanced my house. Because I'm like, okay, there's a lot going on and I'm freaking out. And there are advantages, there are opportunities here that I might not be able to get at another time. So I got to jump on it now. So for me, it's staying active. And then also we did a grant program. So Doxy and I have a nonprofit and we go, okay, we've got money in our bank. We're probably not gonna be able to put on any events for the community over the next couple of years. I'd rather have this in people's hands than in a bank account. So let's kind of get that out there. But I also am going, how can I look out for myself in a way that is going to keep me strong so I can keep giving to people and keep doing things? And so it's that constant balance between these different dialectics in my life of, okay, this is bad. How can it threaten me? But every time that there's a crisis, there's opportunities you don't get in other situations. How can I take advantage of that? And how can I help others? And how can I help myself? How can I work out differently and more? How can I travel the way I want? But how do I stay safe? And if I can't travel as much, how do I be more creative in ways that I haven't been able to because I've been doing other stuff that keeps me busy? And so it's always kind of looking at the big picture for the threats and opportunities, and then finding that middle path that allows me to kind of live my life the way I enjoy living my life in this new situation.
I agree with all of that. Would shift around some details, some verbs and nouns to fit my specific case, but yes, I agree with all that. And it's to end on one proverb that I see right now. Better safe than sorry, but also it seems to me that it can be very unsafe to be super severely safe your whole life, and then reach your twilight years and look back and be like, I I caused my life to be a thing that where I was miserable and now miserable about it. That is that is its own danger. And to never have high risk, high reward experiences.
Yeah, right. And I think that you and I have both in different ways kind of taken a lot of risks in our lives, and it's kind of hurt sometimes, but it's also paid off a lot of times. And again, I'd rather be, if I do make it to 90 sitting on my porch with some warm milk and my false teeth, I'd rather have a lot of memories of both crazy times and mistakes and as well as adventures than have been kind of living in a basement in a bunker the whole time, trying to protect myself from the world. So.
Oh yeah, and another contemporary example that I'm experiencing of the if I were to attempt monogamy, that would be novel to me, being how the last decade of my life has been in that category. The coronavirus pandemic experience the has now made it that what was my livelihood, my source of income, was situations where gatherings are formed and there is a performance or curating an event. That seems to me, I don't know, but it seems like that may not be a thing for months or a year or years. So I was offered a job, or it's not sure yet, but packing boxes with pillows. And it's like, that's something that just 3 months ago I would have been like, oh, I won't work for the industrial pillow complex. But now I'm looking at that and it's like, because options are reduced. And also I'm thinking, like, can I listen to headphones? It's like, that might actually be really great for me right now to do a physical mindless act for this many hours a day. And money, money will create freedom. And then there'll be more, like, and it's funny that that's something like that is looking real good now. a little bit of structure and stability, and maybe even boringness.
And do you like it? Like benefit? You like have a cot? You get to put the pillow on. You can take a nap for your break. That would be awesome. Yeah. I think more jobs need cots.
A fortress of pillows. So yeah, this has been great, and this, I feel like this is a topic. This is a subcategory of the topic of paradoxes and dialectics, proverbs, and memes. That we will continue to generate those as a species, and we'll continue to. Some of us will push back against them.
Exactly. Good talk.
Yeah. All right. Well, take care, everybody. Thank you for those who have participated. This has been the second episode of the Paradialectic podcast, and there shall be more. I
think we should change it every time. Paradoxalectic and Paradialectic every other show.
That's great. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. No, that kind of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
All right. Awesome. All right. Take care, everybody.
Cheers, everybody.